So, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Ernie Bell and his sister Winnie Payne. They're residents of Newport, Oregon. And Ernie and Winnie were living in Berkeley, California when their father got a job working in one of the 10 incarceration camps for Japanese Americans in 1942. So their family moved to Topaz, Utah, and they lived in the camp with the Japanese American incarcerated people. They attended school. Ernie was in the sixth grade. Winnie was in the 4th grade. And they lived in the camp with the people, attended school, went to community events, and made some lifelong friends from the experience. So they're here today to share that experience, talk to us about it, and let's give them a welcome.
Well, our game plan for today is that I'll start out and use the outline that you may have found on your tables, the listing of events. I think there are about 16 different events relating to the incarceration of Japanese Americans. And then Winnie's going to take over and she'll describe some of her experiences and reflections about our time at Topaz. So, let's begin. List some of these events of the incarceration. Keep in mind how the government went step by step by step. First, just asking people to record their names. And then the next step, and then the next step. Keep that in mind because such things are going on right now in our government and in our understanding of immigration and of Muslims who live in the United States. During World War II, more than 120,000 Japanese Americans were imprisoned at concentration camps in the United States. They're called concentration camps because they concentrated, not everybody, just Japanese ancestry people. The fear was that if the Japanese invaded the west coast of America, they would be loyal to Japan rather than the United States. By war's end, there was not one single case of espionage or sabotage by Japanese Americans. As Betty said, we lived in Berkeley then, and sometimes the air raid sirens would sound, and the blackout regulations would take effect. Wardens would go from block to block looking for any bits of light coming through the screened windows. When our family heard the sirens, we followed our family plan. We turned off the natural gas line. We doused all the lights, moved to the basement where all the windows were blacked out, and we had a spot in the corner where we could listen to the radio and wait for an imminent attack. We never knew if the sirens signaled a practice drill or if it was for real. Finally, the all clear signal would sound and we were free to resume our normal activity. Paragraph 2, on December 7th, 1941, just hours after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the FBI rounded up 1,291 Japanese community and religious leaders, arresting them without evidence and freezing their assets. The fate of Japanese Americans in California, Oregon, and Washington was in a state of great agitation and fear. They were often accused of being security risks, and wild rumors circulated about Japanese Americans being engaged in espionage. The FBI had immediately arrested Japanese Americans who had had some connection with Japan. Some 800 fishermen who lived on Terminal Island in the Los Angeles harbor were arrested within a week, and their boats were confiscated. Many of the wives and families were left without a breadwinner, and they had no idea where their husbands had been taken. Paragraph 3, in January of 1942, enemy aliens, that is, subjects or citizens of Japan, Germany, or Italy, in the United States were required to register with the Department of Justice. Their children who were born in the United States and thereby were American citizens were called, euphemistically, non-aliens. Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Roosevelt on February 19, 1942. Authorized the military to exclude any persons from military areas without any trials or hearings, and this was later confirmed by the U.S. Congress. Beginning in March of 1942, orders to evacuate were posted in Japanese American communities, allowing only a few days' notice. They were to report to a location with no more luggage than they could carry. Each family was given a number. Tags were attached to each person and each item of luggage. In her book, Looking Like the Enemy, Mary Matsuda Greenwald describes the day her family was evacuated from Bainbridge Island near Seattle. She was 17 years old and was a junior in high school. She writes, "Mama put on her hat, something she did only when going somewhere special. Instead of slacks and a shirt, she wore a pretty navy blue dress with a white crocheted collar, along with hosiery and dress shoes. She carried a coat and purse. Papa wore his navy blue suit, his white shirt, dress shoes, and hat. We were startled to see covered army trucks lined up along the street. Soldiers stood at attention with rifles and fixed bayonets. We all stopped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Are we going to be treated as prisoners of war and executed?" Papa set his suitcases down without taking his eye off the trucks. His eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened. "Army truck," he mentioned. His shoulders slumped. Under his breath, I heard him whisper, "I wonder what this means." This was the first time I ever saw my father broken. Seeing him defeated terrified me. A soldier gave us tags and our family number, 19788. He looked at each of us and said, "Be sure to put that number on these tags and put them on each piece of luggage. You'll be identified as members of the same family, so be sure to put it on your coat where we can see it." I had become a number, counted and labeled as the enemy. More families arrived. At the sight of the armed soldiers, they all looked frightened and whispered to each other. The children fell silent, huddling close to their parents. The adults were tight-lipped, their eyes darting from soldiers to the guns to the line of army trucks nearby. I stood close to Mama and found comfort in our shared silence. We had no idea where we were going that fateful day as we waited. I did not know what the bigger picture was, and I didn't know if the government did either. All I knew was that all of us of Japanese descent would be affected. Immediately after people were ordered to go to the street corner and wait for trucks, buses, sometimes trains to take them to the next place. There were 16 temporary, they were called assembly centers, hastily prepared for housing in fairgrounds, racetracks, and exhibition buildings. Santa Anita and Tanforan racetracks in California housed many of the Japanese Americans that were at Topaz. Some lived in whitewashed horse stables, while others were assigned hastily built barracks. This was to be their home for some 6 months until the more permanent concentration camps were constructed. Those in Oregon, some 3,676 people of Japanese descent, were confined in the hastily converted animal corrals at Portland's International Livestock Exposition Center. That building still is in existence. It's called the Expo Center. They all lived under one roof in cots lined up. More than 2/3 of the incarcerated Japanese Americans were born in the United States and were therefore U.S. citizens. Many had never been to Japan. They were known as Nisei, the children of the Issei, who were the immigrants to the United States. There were 10 Japanese concentration camps in the United States located in remote areas of California, Idaho, Utah, Arkansas, Colorado, Wyoming, and Arizona. And our family, the Bell family, lived at Topaz, Utah, about 100 miles south of Salt Lake City. The camps were located in inhospitable areas that were often too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. A family was assigned one room with a cot and bedding for each member. That's it. A pot-bellied stove was in the corner. Each block of 12 barracks housed about 200 persons, had a dining hall, men's and women's latrines and shower rooms, and a central laundry room. And here I'd like to show Ernie's PowerPoint. 31 square miles in central Utah. And the square with the X in it was Topaz. That's where everybody lived. The surrounding area was farmland and desert. And some of the farmland was acquired by eminent domain by the U.S. government to provide crops that could be providing food for the people in the project, in the center. In fact, our father was an agriculturalist, and so he was to manage the farm. We'll hear more about his experiences with that when Winnie describes some of the farm quality. The second PowerPoint is a picture of the 1 mile square. City of Topaz was basically 32 blocks of residences and several blocks, some for schools, some for recreation, some for fire breaks. And in the northern part was the hospital. Do you see that's right under the main gate? And then there is the administration. And then to the left of that was housing for the administration. That meant the non-Japanese persons like my dad who had jobs working in administration. And then the hospital, and then in the corner was the military police barracks. And they were outside the wire fence that surrounded the rest of the city. And do you see on the corners and in the midway points are the sentry towers? And those were manned by military police who were armed and could warn people not to get too close to the fence. We had one situation where an elderly man was shot and killed because he didn't seem to be aware that he was getting too close to the fence, and he may not have heard the warnings of the sentry. This is the last of a PowerPoint. This shows a typical block with 12 barracks, and in the lower center part, the dining hall and the kitchen where the food was prepared. And in that H-shaped building was the latrines for the men and for the women, the shower rooms, and the laundry rooms. There's a pile of coal that people could go to and get a supply of coal for their pot-bellied stoves in their so-called apartments. There were 6 apartments in one barrack. The smallest one was 20 feet by 16. The largest one was 24 feet by 20 feet. And the middle one was 20 feet squared. Number 10. Gradually, the camp residents were allowed to get clearance to leave the camp. First, college students were accepted in Eastern and Midwestern universities. Not every university, not every college, but some that thought, let's give these college students a chance to continue their education. Men could sign up to help harvest crops in nearby farms. I noticed one of the panels said the sugar beet people, farmers in Eastern Oregon, were very concerned that they have a labor force to harvest their beets. 11. Finally, the war drew to a close. The U.S. Supreme Court decided that individuals who were considered loyal citizens could not be prevented from living anywhere they chose, including the homes where they had before the war. Number 12, Japanese Americans had served in the Army, having enlisted or being drafted. When war was declared, many were discharged immediately, sent home. I think someone in positions of leadership said, what are all these young men doing in these camps? They could be soldiers. And so they were allowed to volunteer. And then even later, they were drafted back into the Army as the war continued. Here I want to talk a little bit about the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They set up a separate regimental combat team that was only Japanese Americans with their non-Japanese officers. 3 units were eventually mobilized: the 100th Infantry Battalion, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion. The infantry units trained at Camp Shelby in Mississippi, where race was a constant issue for the young soldiers. Officers told the men they were to be considered white, to use white drinking fountains and white bathrooms, and to sit in the front of the bus. The units adopted the slogan, "Go for broke," which crapshooters, I understand, cry when they want to bet everything they have and shoot the works. On August 21st of 1943, the 1st unit joined a convoy heading for North Africa and the fighting in Europe. The Japanese American units were involved in heavy fighting in Italy, France, and Germany, and wondered if sometimes they were assigned suicide missions. If they were being used as cannon fodder, no worry, we'll go for broke. In time, the 442nd became, for its size and length of service, the most decorated unit in U.S. military history. Number 14, the last Japanese internment camp was closed in early 1946. The Civil Liberties Act of 1988 was signed by President Reagan 30 years ago last week, August 10th. President Reagan said, "Yet we must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake." 3 years later, on September 27th, 1992, President Herbert Walker Bush signed the bill that provided for the payment of reparations. No monetary payments can ever fully compensate loyal Japanese Americans for one of the darkest incidents in American constitutional history. We must do everything possible to ensure that such a grave wrong is never repeated.